Okay, well, this is a chapter I wasn't really looking forward to writing, like, at all. But it's something that's so important that basically every pony goes through it in the Wasteland, so it needs to be included. If you're a little colt or filly reading this, please don't. Give it to an adult to read and teach you about it delicately, okay? Okay, here we go. The birds and the bees. That's basically a very, very old-fashioned term that comes from way before the Great War. It made a lot more sense before the Great War too, when birds and bees were normal animals and not giant flying monstrosities. The phrase is supposed to be a nice euphemism for the circle of life and love and babies. But ultimately it just means puberty and sex stuff. Now, I could go referencing my own experience in all this, but no, not going to do that. Luckily, I found a medical journal that puts everything in much more science-y terms that are a lot more useful. This journal also has a lot of graphics and pictures that I'm not going to draw. If you happen to find one out in the Wasteland, it would be best to give it to a medical pony in your group or settlement. But since I don't have a way of just copying this journal, I'm going to have to write some stuff out for the printing press. I'll cover the colts first because, frankly, they're a lot simpler when it comes to this stuff. When a young colt reaches a certain age, he's going to go from thinking all fillies are icky and gross and pulling on their tails to mess with them to thinking they're not so icky. They'll also have a newfound respect for their tails. This is all a natural process basically everyone goes through a few years after they get their marks, usually around the age that they become a teenager. Those teenage years are the most restless time for both sexes. When the colts think of or see a filly they might like, they might notice themselves get bigger. And just like how you're growing taller as you become an adult, everything else is growing generally bigger as well. Phew, okay, maybe I'm not using sciencey terms, but whatever. It doesn't need much explanation anyway, because it becomes a number one thing colts think of about for those teenage years. According to the medical journal, though, if you find yourself bigger for longer than 4 hours at a time, you should seek out a doctor right away. When it's bigger, you pretty much understand what to do with it. Just be smart and use protection, especially if you're not ready to become a father. Because essentially, in those teenage years, all it takes is one time and all of a sudden you have a colt of your own. Now, for the fillies, it's a bit more complicated. You will also find yourself going through changes around the time you become a teenager. That becomes especially clear around a certain time of the year. This is awkward to write considering I just finished the winter solstice chapter, because the time of the year that really matters for the birds and the bees is spring and summer. Let's just say that there's a lot of reasons the winter wrap-up might be a celebration. During those months, roughly the second half of spring and first half of summer, you'll find colts to be a lot less annoying than they usually are. Something about them is literally making you blush. That something is pheromones. And the reason why they're making you blush is because that time of year is normally called breeding season. Sometime in the middle of spring is when your first estrus cycle will start. That's always the roughest one and can last the longest. For anywhere from 2 to 10 days, you'll feel yourself in heat. Literally everything feels really warm these days, and your heart beats very fast as you're swimming in too many hormones and can make you act dumb if you're not careful. During these days especially, you might, well, feel yourself winking back there. It's natural and not really something you can control, same as when a stallion gets bigger. He can't help it either. It's just what happens when mares and stallions are in the same area together. The pheromones' natural smells we give off are very pleasing to each other. Both sexes can save themselves from embarrassment by wearing clothes and armor that cover things up. Once those 2 to 10 days are over, it can be different for every mare, then you will be normal for about 3 weeks until the next one. Now, it is possible to go through this cycle outside of breeding season, but not very likely. Even if you do, it won't be nearly as strong as during the season. Now, while you can enjoy the company of your special sun pony year-round, the breeding season is when most mares are most likely to become pregnant. That is, when you feel so receptive during those months. Stallions, of course, love that time of the year because mares are more likely to love them, but mares must be careful that they don't get too swept up in the passion to have protection either. The most common form of birth controls to find around old pharmacies are condoms, which are for a stallion. Now, all of these are basically 200 years old at this point, so you want to check them to make sure they work. In the case of condoms, this might sound silly, but you want to blow them up like balloons. It's the easiest way to check for holes. They are harder to find, but for mares there's also something called a diaphragm. These aren't one-time use like condoms, you can reuse them. Of course, you might want to wash them considering where they're going, but if you find the one that fits you, it's the easiest way to put you in control of protection and pregnancy. Before the war, there were things like pills and spells that could be used for protection for both mares and stallions. Most of the pills are expired and don't work anymore, so you don't want to rely on them. However, if you have a unicorn doctor, maybe they still know some prophylactic spells. Now, assuming you're a happy couple and do want to become pregnant, breeding season is the time to do it. According to the medical journal, the first estrus cycle usually doesn't make it happen, but by the first one, the mare is at her most ready to become pregnant. If that happens, the pregnancy will last 11 months, then the two of you will be welcoming your new bundle of joy into the world. You might have twins, but that's rare. That basically covers everything. The first few teenage years are the worst for everyone. However, by the time you're in your 20s, everything normalizes and just becomes another part of life. Because that's the point. It's all about life. It's about the next generation that will hopefully change the world for the better, even if just by a little bit. More personally, it's all about bringing a new life into the world and a little colt or filly of your own. Now, this is mainly about ponies. I don't have much knowledge of other creatures like griffins or zebras. I don't know how they're different. For the ghouls, though, you'll notice that breeding season cycles disappear compared to when you were normal. That's because ghouls are infertile and they can't become pregnant. It's one of the many things you'll lose when becoming a ghoul. No skin, no feathers, no babies. It's another thing you have to get used to. But for those who become a ghoul as a colt or a filly, or even as a young mare, it will leave you with an empty feeling sometimes. That's the trade-off for living hundreds of years, although I know some ghouls who would trade those things back in a heartbeat if they could. But at least they don't have to deal with condoms or diaphragms. That can be fun too. And who knows, maybe someday some pony will be able to help ghoulism one day, in so many different ways. For everyone in general, the birds and the bees can be pretty great. Things might get awkward. You may find yourself in an embarrassing situation in public once in a while, but the trade-off of getting to experience love in the purest, most physical way with a special spun pony is a feeling you can't find anywhere else.